We're going to start in the SEC. It was certainly an SEC heavy college football Saturday for us. We'll start with the headliner, I think, of ranked matchup wise, right? Number 8, Ole Miss at number 13, Oklahoma. Ole Miss coming off a tough one last week against Georgia. Oklahoma, they got back in the win column, beating South Carolina after losing the Red River rivalry the week before. Talk to me about this one and what you think and how Ole Miss ended up winning this one.
Yeah, Ole Miss won this game through a mix of their RPO savvy with Trinidad Chambliss and using that RPO really a lot, right? Trinidad threw the ball 44 times. So that was a lot of trust in Lane Kiffin to let him sling it. And to be honest, the way they won this game was just a mutually really good offensive attack. Their defense made a few critical stops they needed to make, but when you look at the stats and the metrics, Ole Miss had 21 first downs, Oklahoma only had 14. When you look at passing yards, Ole Miss had about 70 more passing yards, if I can do math correctly.
Not bad.
Well, that's more like, oh, don't trust my math. Yeah, don't trust my math. Yeah, it's about 70 though. I got my math right.
Come on.
And then the only thing Oklahoma won that was really shocking to me, what we've been saying Oklahoma needed to establish to win games in the SEC was a run game. But the run game was really good for them. They averaged 4.9 yards per rush for Oklahoma, whereas for Ole Miss they only averaged 2.8 yards. So for Oklahoma, this was a game that was, everything you thought they needed to do, they did, right? But they lost physicality defensively, and they lost in their secondary, which I think I've been saying since week 1, since week 2, since they played Michigan, is that I didn't really get to see how that secondary got tested, right? And now we've seen that secondary get tested against Texas and against Ole Miss, and that secondary is folded a little bit. And Oklahoma lost time possession by 11 minutes. You can't lose time possession by 11 minutes and expect to win the ball game. And well, on very rarity. Ole Miss also won the turnover battle 1-0. You got to win the turnover battle if you want to win the game. But for Ole Miss, this game was just really won by a really dynamic offense and their defense coming up clutch when they needed to get a stop. And honestly, I where's the John Mateer that we were watching the first few weeks of college football is really going to be my question, because I feel like we haven't seen that same John Mateer. And is it due to the level of competition, due to a little hand soreness still being there? I don't know what it is, but I haven't seen John Mateer at that Heisman level again since we saw him that way against Michigan.
Yeah, since he's come back, he has looked like a different player, not the one we've seen in those first 3 weeks of college football. And I guess we can start with that because I don't want to overlook what Ole Miss's defense did. Pete Golding, they got his team, his group up and going in this one. They forced Oklahoma to go 4 for 14 on third down, 1 for 3 on fourth down. Oklahoma ran 16 points off in just the third quarter. And after that, I think Oklahoma fans kind of scratching their head like, where in the world did the offense go? Because they had chances. Like Ole Miss early in the third quarter went for it on 4th and 1 from its own 25, had a mishandle on the snap. The whole play just kind of went to nothing, gave the Sooners the ball on the Ole Miss 15-yard line, and they only got 3 out of it. You got to capitalize in those situations. And we know John Mateer to not be invincible in terms of making mistakes, right? But Ole Miss forced him to make some throws, some rushed decisions, I thought. He moved through his reads really quickly. I even think on that fourth down that gave Ole Miss the ball back, basically to ice the game and run out the clock. He had the drop down right to his running back, but overlooked it and was going for the touchdown. Just kind of little things like that I think Ole Miss defense deserves credit for, because they forced him into making those decisions. I also think Lane Kiffin deserves a lot of credit with the amount of noise that's being thrown around lately about the Florida job, the Penn State job, all these jobs opening up. I think we're watching something really cool here with Lane Kiffin, because it's like we're watching a more mature nature come out of him. I know he had the press conference where he was or not the press conference, the post-game interview where he was talking to the Oklahoma player, which is honestly more humorous than it was immature, I thought. But great coaching. I think he's building something different than we've previously seen Lane Kiffin teams build. And what this game was for me on offense was the flip of what the Georgia game was last week. Last week, up 9 in the third quarter against Georgia, didn't sign up to show up in the fourth quarter, and they lost. This time was the opposite. You mentioned time of possession. I thought that was huge. Running game down the stretch wasn't what Ole Miss had hoped, and you pointed that out too. But I think when you have Trinidad Chambliss, you can make do of that. In his 6 starts this year, he's had one game where he didn't throw 300 yards. Like, the dude has a cannon. He had 315, I think you said, in this one. He's done it against everybody. So I think Ole Miss is proving win by win, week by week, that they're not only improving, but that they're a pretty elite team.
Yeah, I think if anything for Ole Miss fans, this is a really good win. I think they should celebrate this one. And like you said, the defense is probably the most underrated, underlooked at thing. Like the defense made stops they needed to. Like you mentioned that fourth down where they, John Mateer could have taken the short dump instead went for the big bang. But I think overall this was just a good SEC ball game and a ball game where Trinidad Chambliss just kind of shined. The way he's able to use his legs and his arms is I think one of the most underrated factors about him because he can run that RPO and he can run Lane Kiffin's offense to a T. And what a good story, man! Trinidad coming from where'd he come from? A D2 program,
Yeah.
Ferris State,
Yep.
Ferris State, I think it is. And just what a good story in college football. And Ole Miss, I think that this year they've taken a step under Lane Kiffin, and that defense has taken a step. And I just think Lane Kiffin has trust. I think he's having fun. I think Ole Miss is having a lot of fun out there. And I think for Oklahoma fans, you kind of scratching your head because you did what you needed to do. You ran the football, and you still came out of that game with a loss. So I don't know what the answer is there, but that front seven has not looked that like it did against Michigan since that game. Probably you could argue against a real opponent because certainly that front seven didn't look that way against Texas, and it didn't look that way against Ole Miss either.
Yeah, and I think for these two teams, it's a tale of two finishes, right? You look at what remains for Ole Miss and for Oklahoma. Ole Miss, they play South Carolina, the Citadel, Florida, and Mississippi State. Oklahoma's schedule that's left is far from easy. At Tennessee, at Bama, Mizzou, and then LSU at home. So two tough spots. And I think Ole Miss, I think the question got brought up kind of on a national stage on game day. People were talking about, does Ole Miss, after winning this game, do they have one of the easiest roads the rest of the regular season to that playoff spot, right? We're talking about the Citadel, South Carolina, who did give Alabama a tough test, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But Florida, we'll see how they are without Billy Napier. Mississippi State has proved to be a tough matchup when they're at home. On the road might be a different story. So I think that's a good question to ask. Is Ole Miss primed for a playoff run? And I'm curious to see if Lane Kiffin can kind of maybe break through that glass ceiling that has been over this Ole Miss program that's really kept them from making that jump.
Yeah, I agree with you right there. The rest of their ending schedule was very favorable. If they can win out, obviously they're a college football playoff lock. I think maybe you could even afford one more loss if you're them, but obviously you don't want to take that second loss because you have the wins now to back your schedule up. But if you're Ole Miss, you just got to finish strong and make that college football playoff, something they have not been able to do.
Exactly. 38-26, the final from Norman. Ole Miss emerges victorious.